Previously
with you.
on Ballz.
Hey, Ross.
Yes, how's it done?
All right, new bud. Sorry about that. We just had a horrible moment of John Walland supposedly doing bikini weather.
No, it's okay. I'm glad you cut me off there.
Yeah, okay. Well, we got you back on the line. Thanks a lot for joining us again this afternoon. We didn't get a chance to get back to you yesterday in terms of wow. If you hear a lot of noise in the background, it's the entire office is outside because it is bucketing with snow in Joburg right now.
I heard it was snowing. I can't believe that.
Right here in the midst of Sandton, Buccleuch interchange, it is bucketing down with snow. Unbelievable sight. All right, let's turn our attention now to Oscar Pistorius, and there have been comments coming from the Olympic Games again about some one or two athletes saying that he has an unfair advantage. I think that is your stance as well as far as Oscar goes, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been a 4-year-long debate, this, and the scientific evidence was collected in 2007 and 2008, and when it eventually emerged into the public, because a lot of it was kept sort of secret for the court cases, as soon as that evidence became available and was published and so on, my reading of it was that it confirmed pretty much what we thought would be the case, and that does suggest that there's an advantage, which I want to maybe make the point that the question about is there a scientific advantage is actually separate from the ethical and the moral and the inspirational side of it. I see them as two separate debates. But Joe, if you ask me scientifically what does the evidence show, I would say that it shows quite a large advantage on balance.
Okay, let's and I don't think any pun was intended there on balance. Let's just have a look at it from the way we see it, okay? And I think when we've watched him race at the Olympics now, the point was made. He basically runs two almost identical 200s. He's slightly his disadvantage versus other athletes from the point of view of his start, as he gets off to a slower start. But he's obviously more consistent over his different splits, the first 200 and the second 200, and obviously has an advantage going into the final 200 because the blades warm up or something happened, but he's obviously got that momentum, and there's obviously not as much of a fatigue factor in the legs as there would be with the other athletes. What is the actual theory there?
Yeah, so the disadvantage is quite clear, and it's a balance issue because our ankles and calf muscles, the main thing that they do, of course, when we start running is they provide that balance, and that's especially difficult when you're coming out of the blocks, and so he does lose time there. The question is how much time, and it's very difficult to quantify. You can imagine it's impossible to test him in two different situations with legs and with prosthetic legs and then work out the difference. So it's something of almost an unanswerable question. But the lack of fatigue that then happens in the second half was one of perhaps three explanations for why there would be an advantage. And people must understand that we don't just wake up one morning and decide that the guy has an advantage because he doesn't have legs. I mean, that's just crazy. But the thing is, we base that idea, or that hypothesis, as we would call it, on what we know to be true. So, for example, we look at the carbon fiber legs, and then we say, let's look at human legs and tendon, and ask whether there is a reason to suggest that there might be an advantage. And the three reasons are, the one that you've touched on is that carbon fiber doesn't fatigue, whereas human tendon and muscle does. And so by the end of a 400-meter race, what you get out of human muscles and tendons is very much lower than at the start. Carbon fiber, it's the same.
Yeah.
But the two bigger reasons are, number one, the mass of those carbon fiber legs is so much lower than human limb. So each of those legs plus the socket weighs about 3 kilograms, whereas you or I and an elite athlete, a Usain Bolt, probably weighs between 5 and 8 kilograms. So that's about 4 to 6 kilograms per leg that is being saved. Now, anyone watching or listening to this can go and run this afternoon and put an extra 4 or 5 kilograms on your feet and see what you feel like. It's a huge difference. So potentially that's an advantage. Then the other potential advantage is that the carbon fiber functions like a spring. It's designed, you look at the shape of those blades, they're curved like this. That's designed to compress and then release, much like a spring would do. So the question is that a better spring than human tendon? And the testing that's been done from many different sources shows that it's actually quite a lot better. So we can measure how much energy gets stored and then released as we push off. And in human tendons, it's about 40%. So we lose 60% of the energy. Whereas carbon fiber blades, it's about 90%. So they only lose 10% of their energy. So those three things together would then lead you to say, it's possible, and I understand that this is a radical idea for people, but it's possible that the carbon fiber legs give someone an overall advantage, or not necessarily overall, but an advantage over the person with limbs. And that's what you then try and answer through scientific testing, as was done on Pistorius.
I'm just thinking in terms of your whole, what you put forward about the weight differential there. And I'm thinking in terms of straight line speed, in other words, speed going forward. If you take a tennis ball and you let it go, you throw it forward, and you take a cricket ball and throw it forward, you'd get more distance. I mean, a cricket ball would be more effective going in that direction than a tennis ball would be, wouldn't it be? And I mean, a tennis ball weighs a lot less. So I'm just using that as an analogy. I mean, is there not also a disadvantage to the fact that his legs are so light?
Well, no, because what happens is, and I understand what you're getting at, but the reason the tennis ball slows down more is because once it's traveling and there's no longer a force on it, then it slows down more because the resistance of the air resistance slows it down relatively more. What happens with a sprinter, and this is now going to answer the question of what the testing found, is that every single step a sprinter takes, so in the case of a 400-meter race, it could be probably in the range of 100 to 120 steps on each side. So in total, rather. Yeah. And what's happening is the sprinter is using his legs much like a piston. He's driving his right leg through, and then he's slamming it down onto the ground, and he has to apply as much force as he can, and then he has to push himself back into the air, and then the other leg. So it's constantly, you're doing the same thing, call it 120 times in a 400-meter race. And the lighter that mass is, the easier it is to do that. Because, again, for those who did physics and so on at school, acceleration, force equals mass times acceleration. So if the mass is lower, you can accelerate something far more rapidly than you can if it is heavier. So then we need to ask the question is, what makes, let's say, Usain Bolt the world's fastest man, as opposed to you or me or John? And the answer is two things. Number one, it's the ability that we have to move our legs quickly. That makes sense, right? In other words, you're not going to run 100 meters like Bolt if you run with slow leg movements. So it's that ability to move the legs. And number two is the ability to apply force. I spoke earlier about pistons that have to slam down onto the ground and then push off the ground so that we can go forward. And the amazing thing, what research has shown, and this is looking at hundreds of sprinters, from the Usain Bolt level guy all the way down to the likes of you and me, is that when we run at top speed, our leg speed is not different to Usain Bolt. It's the amazing thing is that when he's going and winning an Olympic gold medal, his legs are moving as fast as yours and mine, even though we would be running 8 to 9 seconds slower, certainly in my case, than he is. So if you know that, and just stop me if this doesn't make sense.
No,
then you need to ask, well then what's the difference between us and Usain Bolt? The difference is that he is able to apply such massive forces. So that's what separates a fast sprinter from a medium from a poor one, is the ability to apply force to the ground, because the speed with which we can move our legs is limited. So when they tested Pistorius in Texas, they measured the leg speed movement and the force, and they found that he is able to move his legs many percent faster than any human being ever measured. Now, I can throw some numbers at you, but the average time that it takes an able-bodied sprinter to get one leg into position for the next step is about 0.3 seconds. And Pistorius was about 15 to 20% faster than that. And that's purely because the mass that he's moving each time is so light. So he's able to accelerate that mass far more quickly and therefore move his legs much quicker than any other person.
Sorry, I just want to go. Is that not all? Is that not negated in a massive way? I mean, as I say, if you couldn't feel your legs and you try and run a race, it's like when you get dead leg and you try and walk. If you can't feel your legs and you're trying to run a race, I mean, surely you had a much bigger disadvantage to somebody that has got that can actually feel everything that's happening from when he puts his foot down, the pressure's going through there. You've got to bear in mind he can't feel this stuff. So I mean, does that not negate a big factor of that, the fact that he doesn't have that feeling of what's happening in his legs and in his feet, so to speak, or in his blades?
Well, he feels it differently to how you and I would, because he still is connected to the ground. It's not a question that he can't feel, it's just that he can't feel through the foot. But he certainly feels it where the prosthetic limb attaches to his leg. So the fact is that he learned to use blades in order to walk. I mean, not blades necessarily, but artificial limbs, in order to walk, because the amputation happened before he could walk. And that's actually a really important factor. That one of the reasons why there are
Ross,
so
have you
few
tried to
double
walk on a
amputees-
dead leg?
I have, but like if I'd been born like
You
that,
fall
I would've
over. You fall over. You can't. It's
I would,
impossible.
and it's the same thing that happens, incidentally, when someone sprains an ankle ligament, is that they, for the 3 months or whatever it is that they're in a cast, they actually forget how to use the leg. And when they then come out the cast, they can't feel it. And you have to spend a lot of time teaching them how to use their limbs again. But if that's all you've known, then there isn't a disadvantage to doing that. It's much the same as riding a bicycle. First time you sat on it, you fell over all the time. Now it's so natural you don't need to think about it, even though in theory you can't feel the ground. So I would argue that that's not a huge factor, but I would say that the skill of using those prosthetic limbs is remarkable.
Yeah.
But again, even when you look at the Paralympics that come up in a few weeks, there are so few double amputees, and one of the reasons is that you really need the right circumstances, because if you lose limbs as a result of, say, a car accident, when you are, say, a teenager or a young adult, it's almost impossible, I suspect, to learn how to use the carbon fiber blades that he runs on. You need to be able to learn from very young, because you need to become skillful enough to do that. Just to finish off then, the point was that his ability to move the legs so quickly, which was described by his own scientist as being off the charts, what that does is it means that he doesn't have to apply the same forces, because he's got something that no one else has. He's got the ability to move legs quicker, and therefore he doesn't need the same forces that a Usain Bolt or so on would need to have. And that was the reason why one of the scientists who tested him said that he had such a large advantage. He calculated it as being about 12 seconds, which I think was a little bit excessive, based on how he did it. But his argument was that there is an athletic limit to how fast humans can run, and it's imposed by how much force we can apply, because our leg speed is limited. And what he was saying is that if you take away the leg speed limit, then the athletic limit, in other words, how strong you need to be, is gone, and that's an advantage for performance. So that's, I mean, in a nutshell, that's.
Damn. Tell you something. Thank goodness it's come back very quickly. Ross, you still there? Ross, you back? It says that his call's back, but we haven't got him. We'll try and redial him again.
Ooh, it's complicated stuff, though.
Yeah, it is. Look, I mean, as you say, scientifically, these are all the theories, but I mean, there must be.
Hello.
How's it, Ross? Sorry, we lost you there for a second. You were just.
Hey, Darren?
Yeah, were you there? Can you hear us? Ross? Hello. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know whether that was me or you or what happened there, but we'll blame it on the snow.
Yeah, I'll blame it on something. Blame it on our connectivity specifications here in South Africa. I just want to ask you, the surface area of his blade on the ground versus that of a normal athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Does that not also come into effect? Because surely he's got a much smaller surface area actually making contact with the ground than say his other competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the effect of that has been quantified. My first thought is that probably helps, because you want to apply if you can apply the same force over a smaller area, it's better. It's almost like being poked by a sharp sword as opposed to being hit by a brick. You make more of an impact with the same force, the sharper it is. So I suspect that's actually a reason for an advantage, not something that negates it.
All right. How would you then explain his performance? I mean, if he's got this advantage, he was very comfortable in his qualifying race, but semi-final, I mean, he basically tailed off. I think he came second last or last in that race. What do you put that down to then?
Well, I'm not sure. It so much depends on what the athlete's doing training-wise and so forth, because I wouldn't talk about him as though he was completely a different type of athlete. And so my interpretation of that would be that he basically ran a season's best the day before, and I think for any athlete to come back literally the next day and run the same kind of performance is very difficult. You saw it with one of the Belgian twins who ran one of the world's best times in the morning in the heats, and the next day he barely made the final. So that ability to stay at that level is probably more a function of how you recover and your training adaptations and fitness and so forth.
Is that not a factor with the legs for these athletes? So someone who really puts it all in a qualifying race comes back the next day and just can't put it together again. Is that not a massive percentage of that due to the fact that they're suffering from leg fatigue, which Oscar obviously wouldn't necessarily have?
Yeah, I mean the leg fatigue there. The difference is of course below the knee. So it's calf muscle and Achilles tendon, which would be part of it. So you could say that, but to say that is to say that Oscar has no fatigue for me would also be incorrect, because he's still doing the same kind of work. The other studies have found that the cost of him running is lower than it is for other runners. But it's not to say that he's doing nothing. It's not like those blades are propelling him around the track. He's still doing it. Yeah. The question is just that there is an advantage, which, as I mentioned, one of his scientists said was 12 seconds. If he'd made a few more maybe realistic assumptions, he probably would have arrived at between 5 and 6 seconds over a 400-meter race. And that seems to be what the science is saying. The only other piece of the picture that I haven't spoken about is that if you've got this light mass in the limbs, as I explained, and if you've got more energy coming back from carbon fiber than tendon, the other prediction that you would make is that for him to run a 400-meter race or at any speed, he would use less energy, in the same way that a Toyota Prius uses less energy than a big SUV 4x4. And so they test this by measuring how much oxygen he uses, and they found that he does use between 15 and 25% less oxygen than other runners, and so that kind of fits the puzzle. So for me, it's a picture that's got a number of different pieces, and they all kind of point in the same direction.
Ross, you also said on your blog that bad science and dishonest claims were used in his appeal to the CAS. What did you mean by that?
Well, what happened there was, you'll recall that in 2007, the International Athletics Federation banned him based on some testing that they did. And make no mistake, their testing wasn't good. It was a very incomplete way to test it, and I think they made some mistakes in their testing. But what he then did was he had the opportunity to go to the Court of Arbitration and appeal it, as one should, and he went and had testing done in Texas. And what they did there is they compared him to sprinters, and they looked at what I was just mentioning now, how much oxygen he uses. And they found that when he was compared to other sprinters, he uses about 15 to 20% less oxygen than other sprint runners did. So what they then did was they added long distance athletes to the comparison pool. In other words, they went and they looked in what has been published before, and they said, well, he uses less oxygen than sprint runners, but what if we compare him to marathon runners? And when they did that, they found that he started to look a little bit more similar. And the end result was that they had this 400-meter athlete in Pistorius who now looked, in terms of energy and oxygen, the same as a marathon runner. And that was what was presented to the Court of Arbitration. Now, any physiology student who's doing an undergraduate or an honors degree will know that there's a massive difference between a marathon runner and a sprint athlete, and it's just not a valid comparison to make. And so the question for me, and this is what I raised on the website, is why would you make that comparison when you could have compared him to sprinters? Because they didn't disclose to the court that when you did that, when you compared him to sprinters, he looked different. They went and compared him only to endurance runners. So for me, there was selective science there. That was the one point. And the second one was that when they went to the Court of Arbitration, half of that scientific team didn't even go with. And so there'd been a split that had happened between those scientists, because the guy by the name of Peter Weyand, who ultimately would be the one who came out and said, hey, he's got an advantage, he apparently saw on day one that there was this advantage, and he didn't go with. And so all the evidence that we've spoken about the swing time and the fact that he's got these never seen before leg speed movements and what the implications are, that wasn't presented to the Court of Arbitration, even though the data existed. So for me, it was just a very incomplete way to look at the science. And the result was that the decision was reached, in my opinion, based on science that wasn't disclosed to the panel of judges, which was an oversight first by the International Athletics Federation and then by his scientists. It was just, from start to finish, it was bad science.
Have you spoken? I mean, have you and Oscar sat down? Have you spoken? Have you given your theories to him direct? Have you discussed it with him? What's his response been?
No, the story for me began back in 2005. His agent at the time actually called me to ask if we would come out and endorse his attempt to run as an able-bodied runner by saying that there was no advantage.
And you said no.
And, well, at this time we said, well, we don't know. We said that in theory there are a few good reasons to suggest that there might be one, but we would love to test you, and if we find that it's not, if we find that there's no advantage, then we'll gladly back the claim. And we never heard anything back for the next 2 years. And then he started running, and the question was asked, and I think it was in 2007, in about April, tried to explain that, hang on, the fatigue issue, the energy issue, the mass issue, these were potential things to consider. I got an email from his father at one stage saying that I needed to keep quiet, but he never made any direct contact. And I doubt that he will. So.
I mean, is it their, sorry Simon, before you come, is it their fault though? I mean, they went to the court of arbitration, they put forward certain things. It's like someone being in court and going, there was a smoking gun, but they gave a different smoking gun. If the court doesn't find that out and the court doesn't challenge it, then it's not Oscar's fault, it's the court's fault for not challenging what theories were put forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not questioning that. My question there, from the scientific process point of view, is what decisions were made by those scientists. It was just, for me, it's completely independent of Pistorius, and the same goes for his desire to run in able-bodied competitions. Like that's perfectly normal. If he didn't want to do it, I would say he wasn't ambitious enough, because he's so much faster than the people he runs against. So of course he wants to go to that next level. So there's no fault there. There's no issue with making all the sponsorship agreements that he has. Anyone would do it, and he deserves that. It's just, the question is, again, separate one. Scientifically, what does the evidence say? It says advantage, and legally, what evidence was presented? Well, not all of it.
Yeah. Simon, last one.
Just quickly, I'd just like to know, Ross, why raise this now?
Who, me personally?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because it came up in the Olympic Games, and it wasn't a question of me raising it. It was
a couple of athletes raised it.
Yeah, I mean, so it was the response, rather. Because so one of the unfortunate things for me, and this is where it started to get like unnecessary, was that people were saying, well, you're chasing the story. It's not really, because what's happening is an athlete is saying, Michael Johnson came out and said he shouldn't run. So then it becomes news, and people say, well, scientifically, what does he say? And then someone's asked, and if asked, then I'm going to say what the evidence in my view of reading of it says.
Okay.
So it's just because it's so topical, it's therefore worth talking about, I think.
Oh, sure. Sorry, I didn't know that.
It's not like
no,
Ross.
No, it's fine.
I did say it an hour ago.
It's come up,
I zone out when you talk sometimes.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, but when he was running, you were shouting him home, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's a great story, and this is the thing about
that's the thing about it. I mean, he's because I've seen tweets from who was the one person that tweeted some
Samuel L. Jackson,
actresses, people like high-profile people. Denise Richards is the one I saw.
Yeah.
All just saying what an inspiration he is, and I think when it comes to the Olympic Games, that's kind of what overrides everything else. Athletes will question it, but will Oscar ever win an Olympic gold medal in the regular Olympics?
I don't know. But yeah. So the thing is, I agree. I mean, I remember when he got named to the team, Novak Djokovic tweeted something to him and so forth. And,
yes.
and so he is in a sense, like, I use the word advisedly, but like transcendent across outside sport. And so when you do that, I can understand when people are saying that he should compete, because hey, he's not, as you say, he's not winning the Olympic gold, breaking the world records. If he was doing that, then it would be an issue. Then you've got to look at it maybe a bit differently.
If the technology of his legs is improved, because I mean that's one thing that's where there could be an advantage, where whoever I don't know if Ice Express still do his legs, whoever it is, but there's more technology. In other words, like Formula One, Ferraris today are way better than Ferraris 10 years ago. If that technology starts improving to the point where it does become, then I would say it is unfair, because then other athletes do not have that kind of advantage to be able to say, you can't suddenly, it's like baseballers suddenly putting cork in their bats. Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa, it's just not on. So
exactly, and there is a possibility that'll happen. There's been a lot said in the media about how the blades haven't changed in 15, 20 years. That's also not true. There are many articles even written about this, where it's talking about going to Iceland and testing prototypes. I mean, this is an engineering company. That's all they do is innovate.
Well, Ryan, if I could just jump in there, it's Hugh Blade in here. Blades hasn't changed in 65 years. I've been the same.
Same blades.
Since birth.
Ross, we got to move on now, but we appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. As I say, we couldn't get through it yesterday because, this is a very involved story. But I think it's a good place to leave it there as well. Thanks a lot for joining us on Ballz Visual Radio today.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Dan.
All the best, man. Cheers, bud. Bye.
Cheers, Ross.
Ross Tucker there on Ballz. Interesting, very interesting, and you can.
We the best on 3. 1, 2, 3. We the best.
2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Mondays to Fridays live on Ballz.co.za. Ballz.co.za.